I never thought the worst day of my life would start at a family barbecue. The smoke from the grill mixed with laughter that afternoon as I watched Mom flip burgers in the backyard. At 58, she still had that same gentle smile I remembered from childhood. My sister Diane stood beside her, 32 years old and glowing with excitement about something. I was helping Dad set up the folding chairs when Diane called everyone over. "I have amazing news," she announced, her voice bubbling with joy. "We finally closed on the house. It's ours now." Mom beamed at her, that proud mother look spreading across her face. "Just be grateful, Bella," Mom said, turning to me with that familiar tone she used when she wanted me to fall in line. I nodded slowly, not quite understanding why she was directing that comment at me. I was grateful. I'd worked hard for everything I had. At 35, I owned a small marketing consultancy that I'd built from nothing. Then Diane added something that made my stomach turn. "Check the deed," she said with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. The room fell silent. I felt my hands go cold as I processed what she might mean. Diane had been struggling financially for years. She'd gone through 3 different jobs in the past 2 years alone. There was no way she could afford a house in this market. "What do you mean, check the deed?" I asked quietly. Mom's smile faltered for just a moment. That's when Diane pulled out her phone and showed me a photo of the property deed. There at the bottom, clear as day, was a name I recognized, mine, my full legal name, Isabella Marie Crawford. But I hadn't bought a house. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't even been looking at real estate. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled back. "We needed to use your credit score, honey," she explained, as if this was the most reasonable thing in the world. "Diane's credit isn't good enough for a loan that size, and we thought you wouldn't mind helping family." The words hit me like ice water. They hadn't asked, they hadn't discussed it. They'd simply taken my identity and used it to secure a $500,000 loan. "You forged my signature?" I could hear my voice shaking now. Dad looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He'd known, they'd all known. "Don't be dramatic, Bella," Diane said, rolling her eyes. "It's not like you were using your credit for anything important. You already have your condo." I stared at her, this person I'd grown up with, shared a room with, protected from bullies in middle school. And she was standing there acting like she'd borrowed a cup of sugar instead of committing fraud. "This is identity theft," I said clearly. "This is a federal crime." Mom's expression hardened then, that look she got when she didn't want to hear the truth. "Family helps family," she said firmly. "Your father and I raised you better than to be selfish. Diane needs this house. She has dreams too, you know. You can't just think about yourself all the time." The manipulation was so familiar it almost worked. Almost. For years I'd been the responsible one. The one who got good grades, worked through college, built a career. Diane had been the free spirit, the one who needed help, the one everyone protected. And somehow, in this family, being responsible meant I owed something to those who weren't. But this crossed every line. "I want the deed transferred out of my name immediately," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "And I want documentation that I'm not responsible for this loan." Diane laughed, actually laughed. "That's not how it works, sis. The loan is in your name. You're stuck with it. Then I'll report it as fraud." The barbecue ended quickly after that, Mom cried. Dad told me I was tearing the family apart. Diane called me ungrateful and selfish. I left without eating. The next week was a blur of phone calls and paperwork. I contacted the mortgage company first, explaining that my identity had been used without my knowledge or consent. They were sympathetic but firm, until I filed a police report for identity theft. The loan remained my legal responsibility. So I filed the report. The officer who took my statement was kind, a woman in her 40s who'd seen this before. "Family fraud is more common than you'd think," she told me gently. "And it's often the hardest kind to prosecute because victims don't want to press charges." But I did. I pressed charges against Mom, Dad, and Diane. All three of them had participated in the fraud. Mom had provided my personal information. Dad had notarized the forged signature, using his credentials as a licensed notary. Diane had been the beneficiary. My phone exploded with messages. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends, all of them telling me I was wrong. That I was destroying the family. That I should just let it go and work something out. Only my Uncle Frank, Dad's younger brother, reached out with support. "Your father called me bragging about helping Diane get a house," Frank told me over coffee. I asked how she qualified for the loan and he got real quiet. I knew something wasn't right. "I'm sorry, Bella. What they did was wrong." Those words meant more than he knew. The legal process moved slowly. While it ground forward, I discovered the full extent of the damage. Not only had they taken out a mortgage in my name, but they'd also opened 3 credit cards using my information. The total debt was approaching $600,000. My credit score, which I'd carefully maintained in the high 700s, had dropped over 100 points. I couldn't qualify for a car loan. I couldn't refinance my condo. My business line of credit was suddenly under review. Everything I'd worked for was in jeopardy because my own family had betrayed me. The preliminary hearing was set for August. I walked into that courtroom alone, while Mom, Dad, and Diane sat together on the other side with their lawyer. The judge was a silver-haired woman in her 60s who listened carefully to both sides. Their lawyer argued that this was a misunderstanding, a family matter, that shouldn't be in criminal court. He painted me as vindictive and ungrateful. Someone who was using the legal system to hurt her own family. Then it was my turn. I presented the evidence, the forged signature, the notarization done by my father without my presence, the credit cards opened using my information, the recorded phone call where Diane admitted they'd used my identity because her credit was garbage. The judge's expression grew colder with each piece of evidence. "This court takes identity theft very seriously," she said, looking directly at my parents. "The fact that the perpetrators are family members does not diminish the crime. If anything, it makes it more egregious, as there was a pre-existing relationship of trust that was violated." Mom started crying. Dad's jaw was clenched, so tight I thought his teeth might crack. The judge continued, "The defendants are hereby ordered to cease all use of the victim's identity immediately. All accounts opened fraudulently must be closed within 30 days. The mortgage must be either paid in full, refinanced in the defendant's names, or the property must be sold. Failure to comply will result in additional charges." She set a date for the criminal trial 3 months out. As we left the courtroom, Diane grabbed my arm. "You're really going to do this?" she hissed. "You're going to send Mom and Dad to jail?" I looked at her, this stranger wearing my sister's face. "You did this," I said quietly. "All 3 of you made choices. You chose to steal from me. You chose to forge my signature. You chose to risk my entire financial future for a house you couldn't afford. These are the consequences of those choices." She let go like I'd burned her. Over the next few weeks I learned more about the situation than I wanted to know. Diane had convinced Mom and Dad that I owed the family because I'd been successful. She'd told them I was selfish for not helping her get a house when I already had one. Mom had apparently worried about it at first, but Dad had convinced her it would be fine. That I'd understand eventually, that family takes care of family. They'd actually believed I would just accept it. The house they'd bought was a 4-bedroom colonial in a nice neighborhood, far beyond what Diane could maintain even without the mortgage. The property taxes alone were more than she made in 2 months. Reality was setting in for them. Diane tried to refinance in her own name and was denied by every lender. She couldn't qualify for even a fraction of the loan amount. Mom and Dad didn't have the credit or income to refinance either. They were both retired, living on Social Security and modest pensions, which left one option, selling the house. Diane fought it, hired her own lawyer, tried to claim squatters' rights and a dozen other legal theories. None of them worked. The house went on the market in October. I watched from a distance as they held open houses and showings. Part of me felt something that might have been sympathy, but mostly I felt numb. They'd made their choice. They'd chosen Diane's wants over Y writes, the house sold in November, just before Thanksgiving. The sale price covered the mortgage but left nothing for profit after fees and costs. Diane had to move into a small apartment. Mom and Dad helped her with the deposit, money they'd been saving for a cruise they'd planned for their 40th anniversary. I didn't go to Thanksgiving that year. Uncle Frank invited me to his house instead, where I met his wife's extended family. They were warm and welcoming, and nobody asked me to sacrifice my well-being for someone else's benefit. The criminal trial was scheduled for January. The prosecutor offered a plea deal, probation, restitution for the costs I'd incurred fighting the fraud, and mandatory financial counseling for all 3 defendants. Mom and Dad wanted to take it. Diane refused. She wanted to go to trial, convinced a jury would see things her way. Her lawyer eventually convinced her otherwise, explaining that the evidence was overwhelming and a jury would likely convict, resulting in actual jail time instead of probation. They took the plea deal 2 days before Christmas. I got a check for $12,000 to cover my legal fees, credit monitoring, and the costs of fixing my credit report. It was a fraction of what I'd actually spent, but it was something. The probation terms were strict, no contact with me unless I initiated it, regular check-ins with a probation officer, financial counseling sessions twice a month, and community service. Diane had to do an additional 100 hours of community service on top of the standard requirement. I thought that would be the end of it. But in February, I got a call from Mom, Bella. Her voice was small, defeated. I need to tell you something. I almost hung up, but something stopped me. Your father had a heart attack. He's in the hospital. The world tilted. I drove to the hospital in a daze, my mind replaying every harsh word, every accusation, every moment of the past 6 months. Dad looked small in the hospital bed, hooked up to machines that beeped rhythmically. Mom sat beside him, her hair grayer than I remembered, her face lined with new wrinkles. The stress, the doctor explained, combined with pre-existing conditions. He's stable now, but he needs to avoid stress and follow a strict medication regimen. I looked at my father, this man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd helped me with math homework, who'd walked me down the aisle at my wedding before the divorce. This man who'd also betrayed my trust in the worst possible way. I'm sorry, he whispered when he saw me. Bella, I'm so sorry. And I realized something standing there. Being right doesn't always feel like winning. I'd protected myself legally and financially. I'd stood up for what was right, but I'd also lost my family in the process. I know, I said quietly. Over the next few weeks, Dad recovered slowly. I visited a few times, keeping the conversations light and superficial. Mom tried to rebuild bridges, sending careful text messages that respected the no-contact order. By waiting for me to respond first, Diane stayed silent. In March, I got a letter from her. Not a text, not an email, but an actual handwritten letter. It was 6 pages long. She wrote about growing up in my shadow, always feeling like she wasn't good enough, always comparing herself to me. She wrote about the resentment that had built over years, the feeling that life wasn't fair because I seemed to have everything while she struggled. She wrote about how Mom and Dad had treated us differently, how I got praise for achievements while she got pity for trying. And finally, she wrote about understanding now that what they'd done was wrong, that her jealousy and entitlement had led her to justify something unjustifiable. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she wrote at the end. I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to understand that you weren't wrong about any of it. And I'm sorry, I read that letter 5 times. Then I put it in a drawer and tried to move on with my life. But something had shifted. I'd spent so long being angry, being hurt, being righteous in my pain, that I'd forgotten something important. People are complicated, families are messy. And sometimes the people who hurt us are also the people who love us, even if they show it in broken, damaging ways. I'm not saying what they did was okay. It wasn't. I'm not saying I should have just accepted it. I shouldn't have. But I am saying that holding on to anger was exhausting. In April, I reached out to a family therapist. Not for family sessions, just for myself, to process everything that had happened. You're allowed to set boundaries and still have compassion, the therapist told me. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. So I started small. I responded to one of Mom's texts, just a simple acknowledgement of her message. I sent Dad a get well card. I didn't reach out to Diane yet. That wound was still too fresh. By summer, I was having monthly coffee dates with Mom. We talked about safe topics, the garden, her book club, my work. We didn't discuss Diane or the house or what had happened. Dad joined us sometimes, quieter than he used to be, more thoughtful. They were completing their probation requirements. Mom told me the financial counseling had actually been helpful, that they'd learned things about boundaries and enabling that they wished they'd known years ago. We failed you both, she said one afternoon. We treated Diane like she was fragile, and you like you were invincible. We never saw how unfair that was. It wasn't a full apology. It didn't fix everything. But it was something. In October, exactly a year after the house sale, Diane called me. I got a new job, she said. Without preamble. It's in accounting, entry level, but it's steady. And I've been working with a therapist on my issues with money and entitlement. That's good, I said carefully. I'm not calling to ask for anything, she continued. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying. I'm trying to be the kind of person who doesn't do what I did to you. We talked for 15 minutes. Awkward and halting, but civil. We didn't make plans to meet up. We didn't declare everything forgiven. But we had a conversation that didn't end in screaming. And that felt like progress. Now it's been almost 2 years since that barbecue. My credit is restored. My business is thriving. I'm dating someone kind who respects boundaries and would never dream of using me. I see Mom and Dad every few weeks. We're building something new, something based on honesty instead of obligation. Diane and I text occasionally, mostly about neutral things like funny memes or holiday plans. We met for lunch once, and it was surprisingly okay. I don't know if we'll ever be close again. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust them, but I've learned something important through all of this. You can stand up for yourself and still leave the door open for healing. You can set firm boundaries and still have compassion. You can acknowledge that people hurt you and also acknowledge that people can change. What happened to me was wrong. What I did to protect myself was right. And what's happening now, this slow, careful rebuilding, that's okay too. Life isn't a story with a clean ending where everything is resolved and everyone learns their lesson and we all live happily ever after. Life is messy and complicated, and sometimes the people we love most are the ones who hurt us deepest. But it's also full of second chances, if we were brave enough to take them. I'm still learning how to balance justice with mercy, boundaries with connection, protection with vulnerability. Some days I get it right, some days I don't. But I'm trying, and maybe that's all any of us can do. Try, learn, grow, and hope that the people we love are doing the same. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to hear more stories about family, forgiveness, and finding your way through life's hardest moments. Leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts or your own experiences with difficult family situations. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Thank you for listening.